Today on Eric's Test Kitchen, brought to you by
Fox Factory.
Oh, hello and welcome back to Eric's Test Kitchen. I know it's been a little while. I was on a road trip for the last month in Arizona, and now I'm back here in Washington and ready to dive in to a bunch of new cool stuff I'm excited to share. A little hint there, but today I was actually changing out the fork on my e-bike. I'm doing a little bit of upgrade here. I've got this Rockshox Zeb, that's the Select Plus version, I believe, that I've had for quite some time on there. And then I've also run it as a backup on my Orbea Rayons a few times. And hot out of the Fox Factory, we've got a 38 with the newer Grip X2 damper. And I kind of wanted to talk about, is it worth the upgrade? Like, if I had a bike that came with this Zeb Select Plus, would I be doing a good thing by upgrading to something like a factory Fox 38, or is there a better place to spend your money? Obviously, this is just my opinion, but I wanted to talk about, some of the differences I've noticed between both forks. I've spent a lot of time on the 38 in the previous Grip 2 and also the Grip X2, and then I've spent a decent amount of time on this Rockshox Zeb as well, all the way on a Forbidden Druid, a Forbidden Dreadnought, which I think it came stock on, and then on an e-bike quite a bit. So, first off, they're both 38 millimeter stanchions. They're very stiff. They're good for pretty much any use case that is heavy duty, so like enduro or e-bike use. I think stiffness wise, they're very similar. Air spring wise, the feel is not dramatically different. I know Rockshox tends to bounce around a little bit, like they'll change the air spring every year. So I've only tried, I don't know which versions, but I've tried the first version, and I think the second version, and I think the third version as well. And there are subtle differences, but the 38 has stayed consistent. It uses the same air spring, and I do think I prefer the progressivity of the 38 being slightly less than the Zeb. I've noticed that on the Zeb, you run into a much more progressive feeling because the air spring volume is larger, versus on this 38, you have a sleeved design, and that allows for a slightly more linear setting with zero tokens or zero volume reducers. Sorry, Jordy. But I would say, yeah, in the 38, that's maybe the only difference other than the dampers, which we're going to get into in a second. I run 1 or 0 volume reducers in both of these forks, but I've found that on the 38, when I run 0, I get a more linear feel, and sometimes that's actually really nice because I tend to prefer a linear fork and then running more pressure. I would say the 38 tends to have less of a friction-y feeling than some of the Zebs I've found, and I do wonder if that has to do with the floating axle design that you have here versus just a simple tooled axle on the Zeb. But yeah, I've been beating around the bush, and the big difference is dampers. On a fork, especially like a middle of the road Zeb, like the Select Plus, you have basically rebound and compression adjustment, and I would say the compression adjustment on this Zeb has a very limited range. The rebound adjustment has a decent range. I tend to find that I'm on the faster side with a lot of Rockshox products, with the exception being the very newest generation. I haven't owned, but I've ridden some of those brand new ones that have dramatically more range. But I would say a lot of Rockshox stuff in the Charger 2, Charger 3 generation tend to have a slightly over-damped feel, which can be tricky if you are looking for, ultimate comfort or traction. And that's where the Grip X2 comes in, and you have to decide if you're going to upgrade the fork. You could try a new damper, or you could try something like this 38 with the Grip X2 that has 4-way adjustability. So that's high and low speed compression, high and low speed rebound, and that gives you a lot more control. And that's what you're buying on an upgraded fork, is adjustments. And if you know how to use those, you can make the fork work exactly how you want it to. And I've found, especially on the newest Grip X2, I can run anywhere from very open compression to a large amount of compression, and the fork doesn't feel like it's spiking. Like, I don't get a buzz or like a chatter through my hands, but I do get support. That's an upgrade even over the Grip 2, which I felt had a little bit more chatter translate to the hands. The Grip X2 is incredible. I think it's probably the best fork damper that is easily viable, commercially available. And you can use that compression adjustment when you're riding the bike park. And then if it's, really, traction is limited, I'll crank the dial open and it'll just give me a super supple feeling on the fork. On the Zeb Select Plus especially, I find that I just run the compression, almost closed, which then gives me more feedback than I'd like, probably in the low speed end of things. But otherwise, it tends to feel like, also with the more progressive feel of the Zeb, I get this like wallowy kind of thing. And there's just, like I said, with less adjustments, there's more compromises, and you have to decide if you've run into the limits of your current suspension fork, like the Zeb, and do you want the added functionality of an upgraded fork? If you know how to use it, like I said, you can make the fork feel really good. And then as far as high and low speed rebound, I know it's quite complex to understand the differences there. Basically, one is more towards the slower rebounding top of the travel, and the other, high speed, tends to be deeper in the travel when the spring is pushing back with more force, so it'll be faster in the rebound. And I find that ability to adjust different speeds actually very useful, because rebound has a huge effect on front end grip of the bike. And so if I'm somewhere dry and dusty, like I was just in Arizona, I can really dial in the low speed setting for that kitty litter without affecting the way the bike feels in the deeper hits, and it's not packing in. Versus a single rebound adjuster like the Zeb, you're going to run into a compromise because you have broad strokes, you have big differences in clicks, and you only have one adjuster. So that's my rundown. I would say personally, I do prefer the high-end forks. I'm lucky enough to have access to them. I don't think that these basic forks, the Zeb Select Plus being the example in front of me, are bad. I just think that you do run into compromises if you are somewhat competent in setup, and I would say it is worth the upgrade over probably a lot of other things. I'd say upgrading the fork on your bike is one of the most important upgrades you can do after probably tires and durability things like wheels. I would say, yeah, the fork plays a huge role in how your bike feels, and having a really good one is worth it, especially if your old fork is starting to get a little old in the tooth, it's getting scratched up, and you're coming up to a service interval. Maybe find a smoking deal on a 38, which you can find out there, and really upgrade the ride feel of your bike. That's what I'd recommend to a lot of people. Yeah, I feel like that pretty much summarizes it. Both are great platforms. They've been around for a little while now, and I think, Obviously, there's higher end Rockshox options. I'm more just kind of trying to give the example of, if your bike has a more entry level fork on it, is it worth upgrading to the fully adjustable fork? And I would say, if you're racing, if you really are particular about the feel of your bike, if you're chasing front end grip, go for it. It's a great deal in terms of money you can put into your bike and change the performance of it, like I said, right after tires. So yeah, this has been a quick and dirty chat in the kitchen. Thanks for listening to me ramble on the internet, and now go ride your bike. Later.